This is the Infinite Receiving Podcast, helping conscious leaders tap into a wealth of abundance across all areas of your life and business. I'm Susie Ashworth, and I'll be sharing with you how you can upgrade your reality through quantum transformation, because you are ready for infinite receiving. You are going to love this episode with David Chambers. I speak to him after I had just been gently let down by a gentleman that I was seeing. So I go into the call just a little bit like, I'm irritated, but I'm about to speak to a dating and intimacy coach. I want to know all of the things. Tell me about men. What am I not understanding? And it's such a great conversation. We talk about the apps. We talk about the othering of men. We talk about what the stories that men come to David with when they are looking to date but feeling inadequate. We talk about purpose and meaning. There's so much juice in this episode. You are going to love it. So without any further ado, I am going to zip it and let you listen to the podcast. Hello, you gorgeous human being. It is Susie Ashworth, and you are listening to the Infinite Receiving Podcast. And I'm excited. I've got a juicy one for you. Now, you know what I mean when I say the word juicy. I've got a convo coming up with somebody that I cannot wait to introduce you to. His name is David Chambers. He is also known as the Authentic Man. And we met in person at a festival hosted by the incredible Russell Brand a couple of months ago. And actually, before I was wildly impressed with David, he came up to me and was like, "Hi, are you Susie Ashworth?" And I was like, yeah. And as it happens, we have an incredible person who is mutual in both of our lives. Her name is Orsa, and she was a client of mine a few years ago and is David's girlfriend. So we took a pic and said hi, and then David opened his mouth and everybody, including Russell Brand, was like, oh my God. So welcome to the podcast, David.
Thank you, Susie. That's a quite incredible introduction I got there.
I also want to say that before we came on, just very, very briefly, we touched base, and I asked David how he was doing, and he asked me how I was doing. And my response was, I'm okay. I'm a little irritated. And it's not the way that I would normally answer that question, but I decided to be honest for two reasons. One, being known as the Authentic Man, I think actually immediately gave me permission, and I'm interested to know whether it does immediately give people in your world permission to let their guards down. So that was the first reason. And then the second reason is that I was literally talking to a friend yesterday, about the fact that I crave depth and I crave authenticity and realness. And so therefore, when you ask me how I am, it would feel completely out of alignment to say, yes, I'm amazing. So I'm curious. Does everybody kind of just lay it out on the line as soon as you speak to them, or are other people more reserved?
Mixed bag, but I do find that, for instance, I sent someone a message on Instagram yesterday, just someone I noticed he's like popping into my content and stuff, and I thought, let me just see where he's at and how things are with him. And he sent me a really long message back, talking about how he's been struggling, what's been going on for him. And he did the thing that many men do when they open up. He then ended it with like, I'm really sorry if this is too much. So people do open up to me. Like they do open up. They do feel they can. I did a podcast episode actually on my podcast about 2 weeks ago, and the guy within like 5 minutes of being on there, he just kind of stopped me and was just like, listeners, you probably haven't experienced David in this way, but I'm sitting here and I just feel like I could tell him my whole life story.
Yeah.
So yeah, people do often really tell me what's going on for them, and I listen, and I'm interested. I'm interested.
How would you describe what it is that you do?
I find it really hard sometimes. So I'm a men's dating, relationship, and intimacy coach. That's what the outside world kind of looks at me and sees. But a lot of what I do with men is along what you said about craving depth, actually, is helping them kind of descend the layers into their depth. Because as men, we are taught to be shallow. It is an unconscious teaching that happens in our society. We are taught to be shallow. We are taught to just be in the doings of life and to be engaged in what's shallow. And we are scared to go to the depths of things. So that affects our relationships, that affects the level of intimacy we can have, both sexual and non-sexual intimacy. But it also affects us in the way that our authenticity, because we're in the shallow end of life. So we're just doing the things that we think we should be doing. We get the job we should be getting. We marry the person we think we should marry, but we don't get in touch with our own authentic core of go like, what really lights me up? So a lot of men I come into contact with, very successful men in their lives, but they've just followed the kind of blueprint, the relationship and life escalator that was laid out for them. So I help them start to look at their lives, look at themselves, and we explore and we find, and then we sometimes have goals and sometimes it's just an exploration.
How long have you been doing this work?
So I've been doing this work in this guise for about 4 years. 4 years now.
Okay. What brought you to it?
A story of pain, I guess. We start off, like I grew up as a young boy. I grew up in East London. I grew up on the East London Essex border. Both my parents are from Jamaica. I've lived almost my whole life most of my life with my mum, not my whole life, but most of my young life with my mum. My dad wasn't far away, but he was extremely absent emotionally, physically, mentally. He just wasn't that interested. And I used to hate him for it, if I'm honest, but I've come to over many years to have a lot of compassion and understanding for him. And I didn't know what it meant to be a man. No one was around. I didn't have any good male role models. My mum remarried when I was 8 years old, and he was no better than my father, but he just lived in the house. And then I guess, like many young boys, I took my pointers of what it meant to be a man from music, right? I grew up listening to rap music, to grime music, garage music, and all these things. And you looked and thought, okay, what are the rappers I like talking about? They're talking about money, they're talking about women, and they're talking about, we can look back to some of those older videos. I always think of, what song is it? Big Pimpin' by Jay-Z. It's like, there's a pool party, there's loads of women, there's loads of alcohol, they're throwing money around. And so that's what I aim for. And I got myself into a good career. I was making really good money. I learned how to meet women because it wasn't something that came naturally to me necessarily. And then there was the many years of struggling in relationship, feeling empty in between relationships because I was just having a lot of meaningless sex. And this all culminated in a breakup that happened for me in Bolivia. I was traveling the world with my ex-partner and we broke up. And I remember lying in a hotel room. I can tell you the name of the hotel. It's called the Green Hotel in a place called Sucre. And I was lying on the bed crying because we'd broken up. And I was like, I'm not letting this happen again. I'm not letting this happen again. And it all came down to the fact that I struggled to really express my needs, my feelings, my wants, my desires, because there was a lot of layers of fear of being close, being intimate, but also upsetting a partner as well. And that really propelled me to do, a lot of different pieces of work. I ended up doing some plant medicine while I was in Peru. And then I went on a journey of just really deeply connecting with people. A bit like, how we got talking for off air. Instead of when someone asked me how I was, just going, yeah, I'm good, I'm great. I spent 6 months just traveling, and I would ask people the question that was on my mind instead of the question I think I should ask them because that's what's okay. So if someone said to me they were okay and I didn't really believe them, I'd say, hey, I don't believe you. Like, what's really going on? And it really allowed me to get the depth of myself and other people. And I came back to the UK in 2017 and found that a lot of my friends were miserable, depressed, going through divorces and unhappy. And then a friend of mine asked me, could we start a podcast and put together this self-awareness knowledge we have, because we know that's so important, and this dating knowledge that we had from years of dating, and combine them and put them into a podcast. And that was the kind of journey of how things really started into the work that I do now.
But there is so much that you just said. And I think when you said, I didn't have a role model in terms of what it meant to be a man, I'm curious, what did that then mean when it came to your partners? Who were you a match for? What was the type of woman, or who was the type of woman you were attracting at that point in your life?
You know, I always say I've always met amazing women. I have to be really honest. I've always met really amazing women, and I was never in the place to meet them, right? I was never really in the right place to meet them. But what would happen is, and this is me looking back retrospectively, at the time, I think they were needy. I think they were desperate. I think they were irrational. I think they were overly emotional and all those things, right? And that's because at that time I was so shut down. I was so logical. I was very rigid in my belief. I was very like black and white, like this is right, this is wrong. What you're doing is wrong. That's it. I was probably constantly gaslighting. I was constantly invalidating their emotions and feelings. And at the time, you know, me and my boys, when I would tell those stories to my boys, they'd be like, oh yeah, you're right, man. Like she's crazy, you know? Yeah. It's when I look back now and I go, wait a minute, it was my own behavior that created these scenarios and these outcomes in my relationships. It wasn't them, it was me. And like I take real responsibility for that, because that's been the key to me moving forward and being powerful in my love and dating life.
I think it's really interesting because now, as a 44-year-old woman who has gone back into, well, I say back into dating, I never dated before. You know, when I met my ex-partner, you didn't really date. That was an American term. You went out, you went to the pub, you got pissed, you met someone, you liked them, and basically you were together until you weren't together. You weren't dating. And so it's really interesting because I think that a lot of the mindset that we as women have now are, I'm attracting what I'm a match for. And so if we are attracting emotionally unavailable men, or men who, my friend said the other day, I think he might have written the check but doesn't have the money to pay for what he said that he wants. And I loved that phrase. What we're doing, which I think is super helpful to an extent, is like looking at ourselves and taking radical responsibility for who we are and what it is that we're doing and who we're being in order for an emotionally unavailable man to think that he's got a chance. So it's really interesting to hear your take when you say, well, actually, I was expecting you to be like, oh my God, I was meeting all of these crazy women who this and that and this and that. And so to hear you say, actually, it wasn't them, they were great, but I wasn't there. I feel like there's something in this story, like radical responsibility is super important. That's what you're mirroring to me. But there feels like there's a bit of a disconnect there, because the question that we ask ourselves is, oh, what am I doing wrong, or what have I done wrong to attract this into my life? What do you have to say about that? I told you this was going to be a coaching session.
Coaching session for me, or yeah. So okay, what I also had a habit of doing inside of these times, in I'd meet women, and the ones I'd really fall for, the ones I'd really want, the ones I'd be like, oh my God, I'm crazy for this woman, they'd be incredibly avoidant, right? Okay. Incredibly avoidant, right? And this created quite a chaos, because I am an avoidant individual. But put into this dynamic of being with someone who I really want, who's avoidant, I wouldn't say necessarily become really anxious, but I kind of flip between like wanting it and I can't be bothered, right? So it kind of, I mirror to them the hot and cold that they're mirroring to me. Yes. Because I didn't want to seem too keen and so forth. So what I find is I can think of like maybe 3 or 4 women, one of which is I'm still good friends with her actually, where they were terribly unavailable, like incredibly unavailable, right? But it would be a very hot and cold situation where I would go out on a date, we'd have a really good date, and then we'd text for a while, and then they would disappear off the face of the planet for a month. But I'd be like, okay, cool, they're gone. Yeah, cool. And I'd get on with my life and maybe drop them a message once or twice. And then they would be like, hey, David, let's do something. And it could go back and forth like that. And it really culminated in a particular relationship, which is probably really worth mentioning, is that I was dating somebody and we had so much in common. We got on wonderfully. She introduced me to Tantra. We went to festivals together and all sorts. And it culminated in me one day waking up at her place and being like, I love you. And her reaction was like, we need to stop this now. And in that moment, the very thing that I'd always been afraid of, which is liking someone more than they like me, right? That's been something I'd always avoided, kind of consciously and unconsciously, to avoid being hurt. It occurred in a split second, right? Absolutely broke my heart. And to add context to this, we worked together. We worked in the same office. And for the next maybe 7 or 8 months, I'd see her 3 times a week because she worked part-time in the office. And it wasn't the same day. So it was very like, I had no control over when I would see her. She would just walk into the office and I didn't know. Some days she wouldn't be there. Some days she would. So I was brokenhearted by this person. I would see them regularly. I would pine after them. But the very thing I'd always been really afraid of occurred, right? Okay. I loved someone, they didn't love me back, and it broke my heart. And I think a few months in, I really realized, I was like, wait a minute, I'm okay. Like, I can deal with this. Like, okay, I'm sad, I'm hurt, sometimes I cry, I'm upset, but like, I'm okay. Like, my world hasn't fallen apart. Like, the sky hasn't opened up and swallowed me. Like, I've gone off the rails here and there, and maybe I've consumed too much alcohol sometimes and pied a little bit too much, but I'm actually, on the most part, okay. And I remember in that moment realizing, I was like, the very thing I was always afraid of, no longer, when it comes to love and relationship, doesn't have power over me.
Yeah.
It doesn't have power over me. And literally maybe 6 months later, I met Orsa, actually. Very close, not too far from that time.
So what I actually hear is that even though these women, you have deep respect for them and you have deep love for them and you can see them in their magnificence as the evolved, authentic, emotionally intelligent human being you were attracting what you were a match for, because subconsciously you were still in avoidant mode. You still had those avoidant tendencies. And so you were attracting the evil. What I also am hearing is that you're saying, Suze, you've still got to look at you. You thought that there was an opportunity for you to get off the radical responsibility train there, and there is not. Okay, let's end this episode now. I no longer like you.
But let me add one more thing, right? Is this, what you said there is completely right. But I was most attracted to people who are unavailable or unable to give me what I needed. I was most attracted to, right? Yeah. And people who I couldn't really give them what they wanted were most attracted to me, right? Yeah. And this is something I see with the men that I work with and some of the women I work with, is like, actually, we're attracted to the very things that will cause us pain often.
Because those are the things that you need to heal. And what I hear from you is that it wasn't until you healed the fear of rejection that you were able to be available for it without running away from it, you know?
Exactly, because the whole thing I'd been afraid of was trying to be in a relationship with someone and always avoid the potential rejection. But when we avoid rejection, we can never really fully be in. We can never be fully in and open to somebody. I
fully get that. There was, at the beginning of the year, I had a realization, and the realization is that it's the same in business as it is in love. You have to be willing to have your heart smashed into 1,000 pieces again and again and again and again if you are ever going to get what it is that you desire. And it's probably a little bit easier in business. I think that it's easy for me to say in love, but the practice hasn't been there. It's easier for me to the work in business because it's like I have no choice. I can't run away from it. Or when I cap out, when I plateau, I know that it's because there is an opportunity for me to take a bigger risk, be more courageous that I'm not taking. And so therefore, you don't get the movement, you don't get the growth, you don't get the thing that you want to be a match for, that you say that you're a match for, but you're not actually putting your heart in the ring to be obliterated.
Yes. Yeah, I feel that. And I may be the opposite of you. I'm a lot more, I learned to be much more able to do that in relationship.
Yeah.
And sorry, in love, in dating and love. And in business, I'm learning this lesson.
Yeah. I am curious about the type of things. So the men that come and work with you, they are telling you that they're ready for a relationship. Are they telling you that?
They're telling me they want love.
Go on, they're telling you what?
They want love.
They want love. Do you hear that, all of my single ladies out there? David is working with men who tell him that they want love. And I love that, because what I hear from my friends and my peers, and I don't know, I think that we're a similar age. So there's a wave of people who have been in relationships for like 15 years, 20 years, 25 years, and they're coming to the end of those relationships and now they're starting again. So this conversation is rife. For us as women, there's a question mark around whether that's even true, because the men that we're meeting are like it's not reflective of what you've just said. So I think that it's important that everybody hears that men are looking for that. I'm curious, what are they saying? What do they think the issues are with women? Do they even think that the women have issues?
Yeah, they do. They do. And it's a range of things, right? So there's some men who are in this idea that like, women only want a man who's really good looking, that's got loads of money, that has big muscles, up to, some guys, quite a few of my clients, it might seem odd, quite a few of my clients are men who are like 5 foot, anything from 5'6" to 5 foot, kind of 5'8". Right. And their story is that women don't want short men. Like they're emotionally available.
Yeah. I'm a 5'8" woman. And it's true that if I meet you in person, it's going to be a different story. But on an app where I have to make a decision, like, yeah, it's true, I will swipe because I want to wear heels and I want to feel protected and I want to feel like somebody's going to meet me physically, emotionally, intellectually. And so I find it very difficult. I'm now proving the statement. You've got to be very fucking fit. If you're 5'9", you've got to be really, really hot. Otherwise, but I'm 5'8", so I'm a tall woman. And so I also not speaking for all women. I know it's shallow. Yeah. Okay, fine. But that's one story. Go on. What's another one?
Yep. That women just don't choose men who are emotionally open, that are emotionally available. Really? I've got a number of my clients who the work I do with them isn't about helping them open up emotionally. The work I do with them is actually helping them be a bit more resilient to, they're very sensitive, right? So with them, I'm helping them like really increase that kind of masculine energy of like drive and confidence and focus and depth and clarity. And they show up on dates and they're like expressing themselves, expressing their emotions, being felt deeply. And the women are like, oh, no, I didn't really feel a spark there.
Yeah. Okay, I got stories for you. So this is this is interesting because in my world especially, and I feel like my world is our world. So I do feel like we are in a little bit of a bubble in comparison to maybe, 90% of the rest of the population. And women will tell you we want emotionally available men. Now, in my world, as a successful woman, I want an emotionally available man. But what I've also learned through going through my separation and then all of the work that I've done on myself is that for many years I emasculated my man. And so this thing about polarity is really, really present. It's a conversation that I'm having all of the time with my girlfriends, with my mentors, all of the time about how, as a woman who is in a successful position, how do you really allow yourself to be in your feminine? How do you really allow a man to be in his masculine? So when I'm chatting to a guy for the first time on the phone and we're going deep and it's like feeling great, and then all of a sudden he starts crying because he's thinking about his grandpa who passed away like 20 years ago on a first conversation, I'm like, this guy's so in his feminine, he's never going to be able to be like man up for me enough to step out of my masculine. David's just nodding.
Well, I'm nodding this, and I'm like, I guess the first thing that comes to my mind, and I work with women, is like, especially women of our age, our generation. Like I'm 39, just so I'm clear. Yeah. Like there's
Can I just say he just said our age. I just need to point out he just said our age, and he is younger than me. I did think I said 44 earlier on, but I just want to, I could be 39, and that's important.
Anyway, it is very important. So women of our age, and I've got a sister who's like 9 years older than me, right? Very successful woman. She's like top of her game in the fashion world. Like this, she's doing her thing. And what I see with a lot of women is we've gone through the phase of feminism, right? And feminism, in my opinion, what feminism done is help women connect to their masculine energy, right? It's help women connect to masculine energy and like raise the levels of masculine energy they have, drive, focus, determination, independence, all those things. What it hasn't done, it hasn't lit their feminine energy up. They don't have the faith and trust in being in their feminine, right? That's what I see. A lot of women don't have faith in their own feminine. They don't feel safe there. Maybe there's things that have happened in their lives that they don't feel safe. So they're looking for a man to say, hey, I need a man who can make me feel safe in my feminine, right? The problem is, like, will you really? If he shows up and that man might be the guy who cried on the phone, right?
Yeah.
But you're looking for signs already that he can't do that job. So you're scanning the men, going, okay, what evidence can I see in them, in a chink in their armor that shows that they can't do the thing I want them to do? And at the first sign, it's like, boom, there we go. You can't do it. I'm not feeling you anymore. You won't be able to allow me to be safe in my feminine. Is the work really to find a man, or is the work to do the work feminine, to start to feel safe in our feminine?
I mean, always it's up to you. There feels like an and there. There feels like an and there. And I think it's a really important conversation. I think it's a really nuanced conversation. And I think that particularly for the women who are listening to my podcast, many of them are entrepreneurs. Many of them run their own businesses. Many of them, for a long time, were sold the dream that we should want to retire our husbands and our partners. And what that has led to, for the first time, like we are experiencing these issues between masculine and feminine and what it means with the context of feminism and the context of the Me Too movement, and so many different layers where I feel that men actually don't know what the fuck that they are supposed to do, because they are afraid that we're going to be like, you can't do that, you can't do this, you're looking at me like this. A friend of mine was saying when she was in Italy, this guy saw her from across the road and was like, oh, ciao, bella, and just was all wildly expressive, and then got on his knees and was like, you need to come with me. And she said in Italy, that was hilarious. If a guy had tried to do that to her in the States, it would have been like, I'm calling my lawyer. Like, very like different mentality. And I think that you've got women in masculine who have to act, they're not masculine roles. We have to access our masculine energy in order to get shit done, and we do. And then we've been told that we want to retire our husbands so they can choose to do whatever it is that they want to do. But often, but not always, this is the conversation, and also my own experience, is in the retiring of the husband, you remove a lot of their, it's easy to emasculate. It's easy for you to become the mother. And it's easy for you to, I suppose, just dominate, just be in that masculine energy more and more and more. And there's this dance between, I want you to step up, but like you just eloquently, articulately painted the picture of, not allowing them to step up because you don't believe that they can do it as well as you can do it, because they haven't been doing it because you've not been letting them do it. And then you move into, so then you have the separation, then you move into the dating and you desire it. But I also think there's just a whole new relearning of what it means to be in your feminine. What does it mean to be in your feminine versus a surrendered wife? And what does it mean to be in receiving mode versus expecting the guy to take the lead on everything? Like, what does equality mean? There's so many, it's confusing for everybody, I think. What do we do?
Yeah, it is. It's incredibly confusing. It's really confusing because we've got like societal issues, equality, women's rights, and all those things, and then we have our relationships. And like a lot of the time, we're trying to pull that societal ideas into our relationship, like, and create equality in a relationship, which, you know, I think that it doesn't always work. We got to look at the human being in front of us, right? And go, like, for instance, me and also, we play to our strengths, right? We play to our strengths.
What does that
like
mean?
I'm really strong at holding space. Like one of my strengths is holding space and listening. Yeah. So like I hold a lot of space. I listen. I can be really attuned to what she's feeling. Right. So, you know, any given day, like she can open that door, there's a door behind me to my office, and I can almost know exactly what she's feeling, what's going on for her, right? And I can respond to that. That's part of my range as a man. You know, a lot of men don't have that range. Their range is very small and very small. She's actually really organized and structured, right? So she brings a lot of organization and structure. Yeah, that's part of her makeup, right? She's very organized and structured. I'm quite adventurous and free flowing as a person. So like, you know, if we've got to plan a holiday, I'll be like, let's book the flights first and then book the place we're going to stay. And then we're done. Like when we get there, we just see how the days roll and do what we want. And, you know, we'll find food. We'll meet people to tell us what's good. When we first met, when I said that to her, that was like panic stations for her. You know, she was like, what? Like, you want to just not have a plan and have it all organized? I was like, no, it'll work. Like, we'll just rock up and it all happens. And we play into our strengths sometimes, a lot of the time. And that might look, and it's, for instance, like she's going through a phase and has done in our relationship of really stepping into her feminine more and more. And that's meant that like she's gone from wearing lots of black clothes all the time and being very business to, you know, walking around the house naked or wearing lots of color or cooking lots of food because she's really interested in trying out new recipes. Now, if someone from the outside looked, they would go, oh, you seem like you've fallen into those standard kind of like, she does the cooking, you pay the bills, you manage the money. And it's like, well, no, there's a nuanced part to that actually for both of us, there's elements of growth there. Now, it's confusing because it's like, one of the things you said as well is like retiring the husband, right? One of the most important things a man needs, and I see this with so many men, is they need a sense of purpose. Yeah. A sense of purpose and meaning. Like the reason why so many men are struggling in this day and age, from the top of society, men who are very affluent, who have amazing jobs, who run businesses, to men who are struggling. They're homeless. They're deep in mental health issues, is a lack of meaning and purpose in society, in their own lives, in their own families. So this piece about purpose is so vital across the board, because when a man doesn't feel like he has purpose and meaning, then he's like, well, why do I exist? What am I here for? Right. And it creates a lot of separation, a lot of unhappiness internally. So I think the idea around retiring the husband is a beautiful idea, but there will still need to be some level of purpose and meaning for himself, and that meaning is something we have to find for ourselves in our lives. You know, no one can really give us meaning. Like,
I am curious because I think that a lot of people will listen to this and go, well, yeah, I had the idea about retiring my husband and I work and they become the primary child carer. And that's what women have done for a millennia. Why isn't that enough purpose? And I want to say that whilst I know that is enough purpose for some, I'm curious to hear your perspective on this.
I agree with you. I think for some men, that's really purposeful. Like I know a guy who he cares for his 2 kids. Like I think he spends 4 days a week looking after his kids. He's also got a business, but his business doesn't need him so much anymore. And for him, it's really meaningful because of the way his father was. His father was absent. His father didn't really show him much care and attention. So it's so meaningful for him that he has a bond with his kids that surpasses really the bond that the mother has with the children, right? Now, what he was saying to me when we had a conversation is that what he had to get past was society's opinion of him as a man who's staying at home looking after these kids. And he said that was really intense. He said he would go to, and then we add in the level of mistrust and distrust of men, because he said he used to go to like school to pick up his kids. Yeah. And the other women who were picking up their children were almost like, what's this man doing here? Like they weren't outgoing towards him. They didn't try and bond with him. It was almost like, who's this dude and why is he here? Like, what's wrong with him? Why is he looking after the kids?
Is he a pervert?
And then his friends, the male friends that he had, they were all like basically just beating down on him, being like, "Oh, you're not a proper man." Like, and he was getting those messages from going to the schoolyard and picking up kids. And he said he felt incredibly lonely because he goes, when a new woman would go into the school to pick up her kids and they were new, that all the other women would be like, "Hey, how are you? Where are you from?" and get to know them, right? He would go there and he would just be ignored because he was a man. So, and I also wonder, like you said, there's that suspicion of men, the othering of men that happens when there's groups of women that occur that he kind of received. So for him, he had to do a lot of work to move past that. And I think he found like stay-at-home dad groups, like online groups to connect with and talk to that helped him. But for a lot of men, that purpose isn't enough for them. And that's individual to each man, right?
Do you know what? I just want to add one thing. I think the other reason why women don't necessarily gravitate towards men at the school gate, and I said this to my son the other day because I was taking him to rugby. So obviously it's way more men and very few women. And he was like, "Oh, why don't you go and speak to Tom's dad?" And I'm like, I'm not gonna go. Like, and when he was saying speak, it was like go for a drink. I'm like, I'm not gonna go for a drink with Tom's dad as a single mum. Like, that's a no freaking no. My son's like, why? And I'm like, you just don't. Like, so I think that also maybe that is a layer. Like, we don't know who this guy is and what his status is. Oh, he's single. Oh, okay, great. We're all going to chat.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Why don't I think it's enough? I think that I also add into this, I don't think that raising children for a lot of women is enough purpose. I think there's a lot of women out there.
Feels like an even more controversial statement to make, and I think it's true. Need more than that. Yeah, not to say that
there's a lot of women out there.
We're all individuals. I have to have Susie and Mum. It can't be only Mum for me. Both of us have to exist.
Some of us have a drive to have worldly impact. Right? To impact other humans beings in a positive way. And for some people that might be through business and coaching. For some people, like my mum was a social worker, right? And she loved it. She loved being a social worker. It was really meaningful to her, right? To help kids foster an adoption. And it's quite deep when I really think about it, is because to a certain level that she was fostered when she was a kid, not officially, this is back in 1960s Jamaica, when her mother left to come to the UK and left her there, right, with a family who looked after her until she was in her late teenage years. So it's like my mum went and did this work that was meaningful to her, that she could help children and so forth. And she had 4 kids as well. I think for a lot of us, that single purpose of just putting all our energy into children and raising of children, I think it's not enough purpose. And I think when we make it our sole purpose, there is a level of kind of almost enmeshment and codependency that can occur. And I wonder how healthy that is for children as well. So I think that it's not a case of, is it enough purpose for men? Is it enough purpose for human beings in general, for our existence to be just about our children? Because if you look in, I spent some time in the south of Ethiopia, in some of the rural villages there. And what you notice there is the standard kind of division. Like the men go off and look after all of the goats and the herds and all sorts, and basically do nothing most of the day because they just watch them in the field and they talk and, they fix stuff and build stuff. And the women nurture the village. They nurture the village. They nurture each other. They look after each other. They look after the women who are expecting children. Some of the elder women will help with giving birth and advising and eldership and all these things. So what I really saw there was like, oh, yes, the women are also looking after children, but they're not just looking after their children. They're looking after the whole village as a nurturing kind of activity. So their purpose actually isn't just their children. Their purpose is the nurturing of the village and its kind of social health.
Yeah, I love that. And for men, what I hear and also witnessed is that they don't have that experience because they are isolated. Yeah.
Yeah.
You spoke about the othering of men. What did you mean with that statement?
I think that let's give some context to what I'm about to say. I was born in the mid-'80s. So I've grown up in a house. I've got 3 sisters. So I grew up in a house of women, right? Predominantly a house of women. And I have seen, rightly, the movement for bringing women up, right? Across the board, right? See it, I saw it at school. I saw it through university. I've seen it in companies. You know, I worked in tech for 16 years in corporate companies. You know, there's an active and needed kind of bringing women up, right? And women are very good at coming together, like needing help each other. Let's create a group and help each other in the workplace, in the office, and so forth. What we're seeing is that it is, I'll say it is totally fine for a woman in particular to really talk horribly about men or a man in public spaces, and there's no backlash. It's like, yep, open season on men. It's open season on men, right? And men often feel like, especially I look at kind of my generation of men, maybe men who are slightly older, maybe slightly younger, they're a bit like, well, I haven't done anything. I've done my best to be a really good man. I've learned about feminism. I treat women with respect and blah, blah, blah. But all I get told is how terrible I am and how horrible I am and how I built this world to help myself. But I'm struggling. I'm isolated. I'm lonely. I'm struggling to get an education. I'm struggling to get a job. I'm struggling to find a partner. Like, how do those things tally? And I think that men feel isolated and lonely, and they don't grow up with the kind of social skills that women learn quite naturally to connect with one another. Because what we teach men about and boys is competition. You know, I'm regularly having conversations with men in the dating world, and they refer to other men as competition. And I'm like, whoa, dude, we're not all in competition for resources. We're not in that world anymore. Like, there's lots of women out there. There's lots of jobs. There's lots of opportunities. You're not in competition with each other. Collaboration is what creates greatness. But we've been growing up with this idea, this very kind of immature masculine idea of every man is our competition, and it creates a lot of isolation. Plus you add in the fact that men don't have the kind of emotional literacy, emotional expression that women do. So when you bring men together, like they're watching football, yeah, it's great. They can talk about the football, but they don't talk about the very important issues that are in their lives, like their depression, their unhappiness, their struggles at work and all those things, because they don't know how to have those conversations with one another, and they don't know how to listen to those conversations with one another. So often they will maybe turn to their partner and use their partner for all those sorts of conversations. And all it takes is for that relationship to break down. And then suddenly that man, he hardly has any proper friends. He doesn't have a partner. And if he starts to struggle in his work or something like that, he has no one to turn to in the same way that maybe a woman would do, who would be more able to be more vocal and seek help and see that the help is out there.
Is this why the rates of male suicide are so, I was going to say so high. I don't know whether they are much higher than they have ever been, but it's certainly a narrative. Schoolboys, older schoolboys, and then men in terms of mental health. Is that the picture that you've just painted? Is that what you think contributes to the number of men saying, I'm tapping out?
I think it's a really complex issue. I think that you've got to come down to, like, when I talked about purpose, I think purpose is a really important part of that. You know, I think in this world we look around and go, well, who needs men? Who needs me even as a man, you know? Because one of the most important things is we feel belonging. We feel that someone needs us and relies on us, right? We stay around, right? We feel connected. But if you start to feel that no one needs you, no one wants you, no one cares about you, and especially now, a lot of guys that I speak to sometimes in the dating world, they feel very invisible in the dating world, right? You know, a lot of women may go on a dating app and they are frustrated with the quality of their matches. Like, oh, they're getting matches, but they're frustrated with the quality of them. Most men on dating apps, they don't get matches. They might get a match once every 2 weeks, once every month. And they experience a constant rejection of who they are, that there is something wrong with them. So that's like one part that's there. I guess there's also, like I said, the meaning and purpose. There's the loneliness and disconnection. A lot of the ways in which men would bond as young boys, like football and sport, they would do together, like group sport. When you start getting into your 20s and 30s, those things disintegrate and they're gone. So men don't meet up around a common thing to do together. So they become lonely, they become isolated, they're in a job that maybe isn't really fulfilling to them. They don't have the social skills to create new friends potentially. They struggle with relationships, or maybe they have children, but their children live with their mother. The children don't really have much contact with them for whatever reason. And then we start to get into realms of mental health starts to really deteriorate. And that's a very basic story, but there's like so many different strands that kind of cause this male suicide. But I think it's like, you kind of mentioned it earlier, it's like, what is a man's place in society anymore? And I think that has a big pillar, because I think that if you go back 50 years ago, a man knew his place in society and he knew that place was necessary and needed. And if you ask men of today, like, what is your place in society and are you needed for that thing? A lot of men would be like, I don't know if the world really needs me.
And you know what's so big for anybody, we don't always have the video up. So I just shook my head in answer to that question. And then the thought underneath that was, well, of course you're needed. And what is interesting is that it's not the same for men and women. And everything's duality. And what I deeply appreciate about this conversation is that there are pieces that I'm like, oh, we feel like that too. So that sense of belonging and feeling alone, that's a common theme that both, and we're talking very, very heteronormative here, but this is because you know, work to the nature of your work, but everybody, I'm going to be inclusive here. That sense of belonging, I think, is something that from a very young age, most people battle with wanting to find where they belong. So that is similar. That's the same. And then you said so many other things. And again, it's the context of our evolution as a society that, yeah, it's a whole, again, dating is a whole new thing, context, Me Too, feminism, etc., and that same context is impacting men in a way that they've never been impacted before in terms of their place. And so I suppose the question, even without fully formulating the question, the answer, one of the words that's coming through to me is compassion. And I think that there is frequently a lack of compassion. But I'm curious, what do you think that the roadmap is for men and women and relationships in this new world? Like, how do we connect? How do we see each other when it feels like, particularly with the apps, that it is set up for such superficiality, and what we're craving is depth and to be seen and to be witnessed? This is the same across both. What's the roadmap for this?
You know, one of the things you said there was the word compassion. And this is like a really inbuilt part of the work I do with men. And when I coach women, it's also there. It's like having compassion for each other and learning about each other's way of life, story, pain, difficulty, and advantages, right? Looking at things from different perspective and angles, because it's very easy for us to go, oh man, life's great for them. They have all the power. They have all the money. They have all the control. And then we view every man's action that we meet through that lens. Like, oh, he ghosted me. Oh, that means he's just an evil man. Like he's out of order. When we don't stop and think, wait a minute, why would someone ghost someone? Like I've known clients to ghost women that they met that they really liked because they didn't feel good enough. So what I think the roadmap is realizing that I think it's important for men to start to get to know themselves and who they are and bring more of that into the world so they can bring more depth and more clarity and more presence, right, to the women they meet. I think a key part for women is to perspective and compassion for men, and also the same for men, having perspective and compassion for each other's stories, right? And the superficiality that we have to get out of, we have to consciously let go of the superficiality, because humans have always been superficial, right? But dating apps allow us to do it shamelessly. We can shamelessly like go, I don't want to date anybody who has black hair. But no one's gonna know because I haven't told anyone, and it just magically happens on my app, right? Or like, oh, I'm not going to date anybody that doesn't have a degree, or I'm not going to date anybody who like, oh, they're from up north, or they might sound funny. So it's like, can we consciously pull back on the superficiality? Can we be more open to people, like less judgmental, like off the bat? Because sometimes there's some big judgments we make about people by the use of words or how they look, or, you know, something they have in their profile picture. It's like, because we're not like that with people in person. We're a lot more forgiving with people in person, right? And is to also more and more is kind of ask what we want and go for what we want. And this takes a level of confidence and so forth. Like with the men, I'm like, hey, like, oh, you want to talk to that woman? Okay. Like, where are you? You're in a coffee shop. Okay. So you need to be mindful. You're in a public place. It's the middle of the day. It might be unexpected. So maybe you're not going to go in and be like, oh my God, you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen in the world. I'd love to get a number. You may just start talking over whatever coffee she's ordered or something like that. That feels very normal, you know, with a little bit of humor and so forth. And I think that we have to, and this is the hard work, this is the stuff that's hard, is we have to really be mindful of the story that we carry around with us about our desired sex. So as the men I work with, I'm really diving into what's your story about women and how women treat you and what women want, because ultimately all of those things are it's just a personal fable, as I like. It's a phrase I love, personal fable, right? It's not true. It's not true all the time. It might have been true once or twice in the past, and it might be true once or twice in the future. But there's a lot of women in the world that don't adhere to your story and fable. So can you be present to who's in front of you? And then the same is vice versa. You know, when I work with women, I talk to them about the men I work with and how they feel and their struggles and their lack of confidence and the lack of self-belief and the lack of power they feel in their lives. Because when they hear that, they're like, oh God, wait a minute. So that guy who I met, who I thought was really confident because he said he did this for work, actually, now you've said all that, I can see all the signs that he lacked confidence, or, you know, he didn't feel very forward in his communication, but I was talking to him like he was arrogant. So I'm like, so what, how did he receive you? You know, and it's this kind of idea of like getting into like, oh, what's my story? How do I communicate that? And how is someone else's experience of me as well? Like it's taking ourselves out of ourselves and really looking at how people receive us.
I want to ask you about going back to this masculine and feminine energy piece, because I think as well for women who really do want to be more in their feminine and express that and celebrate that, it's challenging with the apps when you're having to, like if you're on Bumble, for example, you're the person who has to make the first move. And I think traditionally still society says men should make the first move. And then there's this story that if I'm going to attract a masculine man, a guy that's in his masculine energy, he's going to feel good about making the first move. And yet we know that men are feeling nervous about making the first move. But I'm curious about, like, how important is this story about masculine and feminine energy? For me, it does feel important. When I look at the lessons of my old relationship, it does feel important. When I think about what I desire in my next relationship, it does feel important. But again, this whole dynamic with the apps and what you just said about the ghosting, it's easy to make a story and be like, God, that person's an asshole. I never want to connect. And then the other story is like, oh, I've not heard from them for a while. We're in an age where a woman can reach out. So then you reach out and then maybe they don't respond, or maybe they do respond. And it's this game of they only ever respond if you reach out because they're not feeling confident. It's like, I hear everything. I have compassion, but maybe my match is beyond this space right now. What do you hear when I say, like, I'll pay you afterwards? I'll PayPal you.
I think that the masculine feminine piece is important, right? But I think we also shouldn't overlay too much importance on it as like looking for everything as evidence of like them being masculine enough. Like, because if we got our radar out and we're like, okay, I'm looking for evidence that, or the opposite, we're looking for evidence that he's not masculine enough, we're going to find a ton of evidence. We can always find evidence, right? If we want evidence to go in the evidence bag, we can always find it, right? I feel like relationships can be, I believe that relationships are one of the greatest vehicles for growth, right? It has been for me, and 100%. I see this in the men and women that I work with. So we may meet someone who, I say for myself, like, I met my partner also, and would I say when I met her, she's the most feminine person? Definitely not. Definitely not. I used to tease her about it, and I still do from time to time about that. But I could also see beyond that. Like, how important is it that she's like free and flowing all the time? And I never pressured her to be that way. It was really a choice of her own. I think that you have to be mindful of, like, we always, like I said, we find evidence of the things that we don't necessarily want. But there are men out there who they want to make the first move, or they don't really care if they make the first move or not, right? Because leadership is shared a lot of the time, right? This whole like first move thing is like, what is the first move? What does that look like? Like, is it the first person who sends a message? Is it the first person who arranges the date? Is it the first person who expresses how they really feel? Like, there's so many different nuances in how we can lead communication, or we can lead. Like, if I gave you options of where to go, is that leadership, or is that me copping out from leadership?
Copping out.
So it's what we make it mean. Like, because there's some people, from a dating point of view, they're like, okay, you should really lead the interaction. And I do say that to men, you should lead the interaction. But when you lead, part of leadership, and important parts of leadership is feeling those people you're leading, right? You need to feel the people you're leading. Like, if I lead without my heart, I lead without feeling, then I can become abusive. I can become a tyrant. So when I'm checking in for feeling, like, do we interpret that as a lack of confidence in their leadership? Do we receive that as they're trying to pass leadership onto us in some way? Yeah. It's just being really mindful of like how we receive kind of leadership and being led, because we might have a story about leadership, right? A lot of us have stories about men and leadership of being toxic and being dangerous and being harmful. So it's like getting into the nuances is how we interpret that what's happening in the kind of dating stages.
What I'm taking from this is that it's okay for you to have your preferences. Like, your preference is your preference is your preference. So that's the first thing. But secondly, everything is an unfolding. We're very quick to make a decision about who somebody is when if you are somebody who recognizes that they crave depth, the idea that you can have a complete picture of somebody who sends a text and that's not quite in alignment with your picture of what it is that you want, that you know all about them. And I think that probably is the biggest challenge. It's moving beyond the immediacy of the snap judgment, thinking that you know somebody when you haven't got a clue. And I think what is exciting is when I think about the men who are attracted to you, is that these are men of depth. These are men of character. And even if they haven't been displaying it as much as they desire so far, it's exciting to know that there are men out there that are like, I'm ready to do the work. I want to do the work, and showing up for themselves. I think that it's easy to think, maybe all of the good ones are gone. And I know that men think that as well. Maybe all of the good ones are gone. And it's nice to know that it's not true.
Definitely not true.
It's definitely not true. I could literally speak to you for about the next 3 hours, but I have another call. So I'm going to ask you my closing questions that I ask everybody in celebration for the Infinite Receiving book. And I am curious, David, what does infinite receiving mean to you?
When I think of infinite receiving, I see like a openness, an openness to receiving what is there and really receiving it, and not maybe being too focused on how it should look, but receiving what is there. Because there's so much love and beauty that we're always receiving. Like even something as simple as like the trees are sending you love. They send you oxygen. like send you beauty. It's like, are we willing to receive that? Or are we only looking for receiving the money that we think is beautiful and then feeling like we're not receiving?
I love that so much. How good are you at receiving infinitely?
It's a work in progress. ever, always work in progress, but something that I'm actively working on.
Where or who in your life could you allow to love you more right now?
Probably my partner also.
Yeah. What is your greatest attribute?
Good with people.
Yeah. What are you consciously working on manifesting right now?
I'm consciously working on expanding my business while reducing the amount of time that I'm working on my business.
Okay, amazing. And finally, where can you allow yourself to be supported more right now?
I think I could allow myself to be supported more in like seeking out people that have treaded the path that I'm walking on and I'm moving towards, which is towards family, which is towards more business, and like using them as sounding boards, not necessarily as like coaches, but as just like kind of mentoring.
Yeah, I love that so much. Can you tell everybody where they can find you and your incredible work? I just want to say, I can't emphasize enough just how much respect I have for the work that you're doing. It feels so powerful and so deep, and it is so needed. And I am, really, really grateful for your terrible breakup and your decision to sort your life out. I think, you're really making a huge difference, and I'm really grateful.
Thank you, Susie. Where can people find me? Instagram. That's probably the place where I'm most active. That's at the Authentic Man _. And if you want to hear me rambling about things and talking to wonderful guests, the next place is my podcast, which is The Authentic Man with David Chambers.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. And I look forward to seeing you soon somewhere in the world.
Thank you, Susie. Thank you for having me.
If you have loved this podcast episode as much as I have, please, for the love of all things good, go and tag me, tag Dave on Instagram. Let us know what you thought. I would really, really love it. And in the meantime, please remember that faith plus action equals miracles. Thank you for listening to Infinite Receiving with me, Susie Ashworth. I'd love to share with you my Infinite Receiving activation audio. Go to susieashworth.com/activate infinite receiving.